Okay, this is going to be about the Articles of Confederation. If I need more than one part, I'll label it part one. Don't yet. I would like to get through it in one because I don't even always deal with it in a face-to-face class, but we're going to give it a shot here. There shouldn't be more than about two or three of these left. Okay, Articles of Confederation was our first attempt at a constitution. We didn't really call this a constitution, it called it the Articles of Confederation. Now, looking at the questions from your class notes worksheet, which you should keep in front of you when you're watching these, what were the circumstances of the writing and adoption of the Articles of Confederation? What delayed their adoption, and how was this resolved? Okay, I don't want to take a lot of time with that. The supplement is not only quite comprehensive on that, I think the supplement I wrote is more comprehensive than any actual textbook I've ever seen. But anyway, when the Second Continental Congress was about ready to declare independence in 1776, the same day Richard Henry Lee proposed the resolution for independence, the Congress set up three committees. One was the committee that drafted the Declaration. Another committee was going to pursue commercial treaties with France and Spain, I believe. And yet another committee was supposed to draw up a set of ground rules under which the colonies, once they had stopped being colonies and had become free and independent states, how they would interact and cooperate to win the war, set up some kind of central clearinghouse through which they could act together. Okay, chairman of that committee was none other than John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, who favored independence but didn't vote for it because he thought that there were other avenues that should be explored first. Well, leaving that aside, his committee actually reported back before Jefferson's committee did, bringing back a document, a proposed document known as the Articles of Confederation. It crashed on takeoff because his version would have set up a fairly powerful, by their standards, central government, and nobody wanted that except Dickinson and a handful of others, because what are we fighting for here? We're fighting for freedom and independence. What does that mean? It means that we don't have to obey laws or pay taxes that came from any higher level than our own colonial or about to be state government. Why would we set up an American parliament to do to us what we're fighting to keep the British parliament from doing to us? So this document kept being amended and altered and kicked around and talked about and kicked down the road for over a year, almost a year and a half. It did not go to the states for approval until November 1777, after the first draft coming in June of 1776. Within a couple of years, 11 of the 13 states had signed on. Now, I should tell you, it would not take effect until all 13 states had approved it. They're about to learn a lesson here. Remember that this is the first time out for these guys. There's some things that are simple to us. They just got to learn them because this hadn't been done before. One is that whenever you require a supermajority to do anything, you open the door to minority rule. Got it? If it takes all 13, one holdout can delay it. One holdout can overrule all the others. And that's what ended up happening. For the last 2 years, about 1779, you got 11. I think then a 12th one came in, and the holdout was Maryland. What the deal was that about half of the states had, based on their old original colonial charters, claims on almost limitless amounts of land to the west, okay, of the Appalachian Mountains, which is as far as settlement went. Virginia was a mammoth. Virginia claimed what is now Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Whoa. North Carolina and Georgia both claimed to go all the way to the Pacific coast, and nobody had a clue how far that was. Massachusetts and Connecticut both claimed that whenever Pennsylvania stopped and New York, they started up again. So you have the landed states and the landless states, and the fear was that with all the states going into debt to fight the war, which was going on at the time, once it's over, the states with all this excessive amount of land could simply sell it off and retire their war debt, and the landless states like Maryland wouldn't have that option, and there'd be a population drain from the landless states to the landed states where taxes were lower. I told you a lot to not tell you very much. This eventually, and there's other stuff described in the supplement, near the end of the war, remember Charles Cornwallis brought the British Army up out of the deep south into Virginia in 1780, and that threat seemed bigger than what else Maryland had to be afraid of, so they ratified the articles and they took effect on, I believe it was February 1st, 1781. So that's how that got resolved, but even then, you don't have much. Structure, powers, and weaknesses of the government created by the Articles and its two main weaknesses, okay? The Articles of Confederation created a union, quote unquote, which is much more like today's United Nations than today's United States, okay? The United Nations has, I think, over 180 member nations. Each has one vote in what they call the General Assembly, but it can't do anything. Fortunately, because if it could, we'd have world government. And whatever you may hear or whatever it may be fashionable to believe, don't drink that Kool-Aid. That would be a nightmare. You speak of something be a sign of the end times, that really would be. Okay? And some people are really for it. All right. So the government, quote unquote, I hate to use the word government because it's not really authorized to do any governing. It's just a clearinghouse. You have a Congress. Okay, there's no three branches. There's no executive branch, meaning there's no president. There's no bureaucracy or anything like that. And there's no judicial branch. There are no national courts. Each state had its own courts. Wouldn't that be enough? You don't need state courts. You don't need national courts when there aren't going to be any national laws to speak of, and there won't be. So it's just Congress. It's not a two-house Congress. It's just Congress. The states are equally represented regardless of population. And the disparity was greater then than now. Today, there are roughly 60 Californians for every Wyomingan. In those days, Virginia had 80 times the population of Georgia. But each state had one vote in Congress, which represented the states as equal political entities. Each state could send a delegation of anywhere from 2 to 7 delegates at the state's own expense. They would decide among themselves how to cast their state's vote if there was anything to be voted on, or the legislature of the state could send them binding instructions on how they were to vote. They did not vote as individuals. So, and it took a majority of the delegation. So if you've got 5 delegates and only 2 of them are there, or 6 delegates and only 3 of them are there, that's not a majority. They couldn't cast the vote. They were hamstrung by very, very prohibiting rules of procedure. The only thing they could approve without a 2/3 majority of the total number of states was a motion to adjourn. It took a majority. For anything serious, it would take a 2/3 majority. And some things Congress could do it. I'll come back to this. Taxation, could Congress tax? Technically, yes, but functionally, no. Congress could enact a tax, and they did at least one occasion, but it couldn't be implemented until all 13 legislatures have followed up by approving it. So they're so afraid a bad decision might be made, they pretty well clocked it up where no decision at all could be made. All right. Powers and weaknesses. It has an impressive list of powers, but no real authority. My metaphor for this is, let's say you're walking down the middle of what looks like a substantial town with substantial buildings on both sides. So you just walk through a door and check one out and find that it's like a false front in a movie set. There's no building behind it. There's just some, plywood and 2 by 4s holding it up. That's kind of what this was. Congress had the authority to make treaties with foreign governments, but since it has no authority over any state or any citizen of any state, it can't guarantee that the treaty terms will be carried out. Congress can declare war, but it could not wage war without troops, and it would have to depend on the states to send the troops, and it would be optional whether they did or not. Okay? Congress could borrow money. But since it has no independent source of revenue, it can't tax anybody. It can't guarantee that the money it borrows will be repaid. This is adding up, isn't it? So Congress does not. It's as if the states. The states are all. It's 13 independent countries, is what they are. They have their own laws. They have their own courts, and their participation in this. I don't want to use national because that takes common identity is next to nothing. The two main weaknesses. One of them may be a little harder to grasp because it's so much a given now. Congress has no authority to regulate trade among the states. Okay. What that means is that the states could, if they chose, practice something called protectionism against other states. All right? And that's going to get to be a problem. Now, today, I guess we still at least pay lip service to this. Everything our federal government does is supposed to tie back, either explicitly or by implication, to specific language in the Constitution. All right? The one power of Congress that is leaned on more than anything else is Congress's power to regulate trade among the states. That's not there under the Articles. It just wasn't there, so that can't happen. When we get to problems they had, I'll come back and tell you why that's a problem. Another problem is Congress has no effective power to tax. It cannot levy a tax because only the states could do that. This is what we're fighting for in the Revolution, to keep from having some authority higher than our own state government taxing us. So anything else would be a non-starter. The problem is, during the war and continuing under the Articles, Congress was borrowing money, immense amounts of money, by printing up IOUs and spending them. The ones issued during the war are called Continentals. They become a byword for worthlessness. So, Congress has no way to guarantee the repayment of that. Now, we were in debt to the French government. We were in debt to a lot of Dutch bankers who had been willing to bet on us all along. If the interest came due and we don't have it, they would roll the interest over the unpaid interest into the principal and give us another year. They were richly rewarded a little later on. But those are both very serious problems. So Congress shouldn't really be thought of as a government because it has no authority, it has no control over anything other than land that the states donated to the national government or to the United States in Congress assembled, as they would have worded it, in order to get the Articles ratified to begin with. Okay. Main accomplishments. This is going to take to a second part. There are a number of things, but I get it down to three. Two of them were legislative accomplishments, and they had to do with a large area of land donated to the national government by Virginia, and maybe a couple of other states that also had overlapping claims. This would be the land north of the Ohio River, and if you can picture that, the southern bank of the Ohio is now Kentucky, which split off from Virginia a little later and was admitted as a state. The 15th state, I believe, and the Mississippi on the west and the Great Lakes in the north. This came to be called the Northwest Territory, or the Old Northwest. There, Congress actually did have authority. So there was the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which I will pick up in Articles of Confederation, Part 2. Isn't this exciting?